So, is it time for your new favorite movie ever, Bus
It's
Stop?
time for my new favorite movie ever, Bus Stop. This is
I
definitely
am
not.
thankful
That
for
was
this
definitely that
movie.
was
This movie is a revelation for you. You just
yeah.
watched it and you were like texting me your thoughts. Again, spoilers for the entirety of the film Bus Stop from
And any other movie we
1966 and any
mentioned.
movie we mentioned. Do you want to give the synopsis?
I'm gonna let you do this synopsis.
A 21-year-old cowboy leaves the ranch and discovers women, and he kidnaps Marilyn Monroe, and she falls in love with him. The end.
That is the movie. Okay,
Yes.
so there's two things. This reminds me a little bit of when I saw Showgirls, and that surprised you with so much with how I loved that movie. And Showgirls is great. I love Showgirls. This is kind of a different thing. It's definitely, I mean, Showgirls is one of, I don't know, it may be one of my favorite movies now. I don't know. But like this is just like it's so hard. Like, I think I finally got you to understand why I like noirs, and I may have even
Right.
helped you get into noirs a little more, right? Like, I might have
Right.
finally like done something there. And it's like,
I
this
still
is
have
the
a lower tolerance than you overall, but I'm starting to see the appeal. Yes.
yes, and like it took a long time, but I kind of got there. And like this is kind of the same thing, except instead of last week, it's this week, and now it's you getting me into the thing and
Well,
all
because
that.
I talked about it when we talked about Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and the 7 Year Itch and How to Marry a Millionaire. I have not long, but I, I've been intrigued by movies from the 50s and 60s for a while, and was finally able to really realize within the last year or so that it's because they're insane, because
Yes,
they're made by a repressive culture that isn't actually repressive anymore. And then
yes.
the 70s happen, and all the glitz and glamour get just peeled away and pushed away, and instead we get like Midnight Cowboy and Taxi Driver and
Yeah, which are
stuff like
movies I
that.
like, but it's different fare, very
But
different
before,
fare.
we still have the code in effect, and so you get these very weird movies. And
I'm just gonna
you listened to me talk about this, but I feel like you never really understood.
I never really understood because like I would often like I'm just so put off by like the horrible morality of it and like just how awful it is.
Well, I
But
remember
so
you
like
watched West Side Story, and it was like you had no idea how to talk about it. Like you were
no,
like, I don't.
I had no place of reference really. And it could be that I've just watched enough of these movies now. I'm just a little bit
I
older. I've
think
seen enough of the earlier movies. I'm just gonna cut right to the chase with it. So in the end of the movie, when after Don Murray, who plays Cowboy Man Bo, has been beat up by the bus driver, who is played by I don't maybe Arthur O'Connell. I don't know. I'm just gonna guess. No, No, he is played by Robert Bray. Gets beat up by Robert Bray. And like now he goes and he's learned humility, and he goes and he apologizes to everyone and has a more thoughtful conversation with Marilyn Monroe, or Cherie, or Cherry as he calls her. And
mhm.
like they're getting back together, and like meanwhile since the beginning of the movie I've been like, oh, this is going to be Stockholm Syndrome. And here we are, and we've arrived at Stockholm Syndrome. I cannot contain myself. I burst into laughter, and I just start giggling and giggling and giggling for like 5 minutes. Like I could not contain myself. I would stop laughing and I'd look at the screen and like try and pay attention, and then I would just start laughing again because it is so insane. And like I think that was like the true moment I realized the morality in like 40s and 30s movies is often similarly problematic. Not always, like anything, it depends on the movie and all that, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of movies with troubling and problematic, you know, morality. And, it's not a noir where those guys die at the end. So it's not that kind of classical thing. This is like there's no one murdering, and like and it's like here's the morality of like this man is not listening to this woman, and yet he's going to get the girl at the end because he's going to learn humility and become a better person, and his reward is her. And it's like that trope, but with it's in Technicolor, and it's like he's yelling and moving around, and I think he got like a nomination for his role in this or something. And like meanwhile she's like just this helpless little girl from the Ozarks, and like he's being nice to her and sweet to her, and that's all she needed was some nice sweet
See,
guy,
that's
and
what.
just anyone will do apparently. And it's just like I just couldn't contain it. It's
Well, and I think
just
that's what
so
you finally, because we were talking about Out of the Past, and that's a black and white noir, and all the and I finally hooked into what you liked about them, which is that they have the same kind of like screwed up morality sometimes, because in Out
Yeah.
of the Past, it's like a young deaf man murders someone, and it is literally unremarked upon in the film. Texturally within the film, no one cares.
No one
But
cares.
she kills people. She kills someone, and it is the worst. But this is all in black and white, and everybody's being serious, and it's dark, and it's dreary, and it's depressing, and it's
Yeah.
all crap.
Yeah.
The 50s, 60s, you have like Marilyn Monroe's character falling in love with the man who kidnaps her and doesn't understand that the world doesn't revolve around him, and it is bright and it is cheerful and it is colorful and it has a happy ending. The
It's
noirs
like,
don't have happy ending.
what
There's
would
a
the genre for this be? Like rom-com? Like, is this just a
it
rom-com?
is a rom-com. I mean, that's what it is, genuinely. And
It's
I mean, honestly, watching this, I realized that there is just a long history, because last year I went through a fit of rom-com watching, and I was going to do something with it, and I may yet. But part of me was like, what is with these movies? They're so messed up sometimes in like how people choose each other and why. And watching this, I realized like, oh, there is a long history of just questionable. But the thing that really gets me about it is that it's bright and cheerful and there's a happy ending. Like,
yeah.
and in a way, these are like, you think about the bad movies that we like, where you're watching something from the 80s or the 90s, or even more recent, and it's usually low budget, and people are just doing things for no reason that you can understand, and it's just ridiculous. But these are like made by the studio, starring Marilyn Monroe or other people, because I'm not just talking about Bus Stop. And it's like these are the highest budget bad movies you'll ever see. Like,
Yeah. And
it's a
like,
fun hate watch. Yeah, because Bo, and I have an actual defense for why it doesn't quite work, that doesn't have to do necessarily with the 50s. But Bo is the other weird thing to me about this. Okay, sorry, start over a little bit. Is that at its core is a premise that I think is really interesting, and something that like, and that's when I talk about like Gigi or Lily, um, or even something like West Side Story. There's a premise in there that's like a societal issue to be explored. Like, 21-year-old guy, like, listen to me without like the movie in your head. There's a 21-year-old guy straight off the ranch, like gets a little encouragement that like he's going to need to marry at some point, but he really doesn't know many people. He falls in love with someone who is completely inappropriate for him. She's older, she's jaded, she's, had a lot of boyfriends, and they form this tentative relationship where, eventually, he just loves her for who she is, and she comes to, recognize the value of that. Like, that's like, you could do something. I'd like more, I'd like a little more than that, but like, that's like a kind of a touching premise. Like, that's a rom-com I might want to see. That
yeah.
is not what's on screen, though. What's on
No.
screen is this entitled 21-year-old who goes around thinking that he can just tell people what to do.
Yeah.
At the end, he gets beat up in the snow and has a tiny amount of character growth. And yeah, Marilyn Monroe becomes his reward. Like, and it's just so funny to me, because I want to see that premise done better. And yet I'm fascinated with where they took it.
Well, so I agree, because that was the other thing I thought I had about this was I was like, well, the premise isn't really that bad, because like you sometimes get the reverse of it, a small town girl going to the big city and finds a
Yeah.
worldly man, and they
Yeah.
figure it out, and like she's his prize, and it's the worthy, it's that kind of thing. I feel like I don't know how many of these I've seen where it's this way, where it's like the man who's the virginal, like,
Yeah.
whatever, and the woman's the world weary one. I must have seen it somewhere, but I'm not sure. But somehow they take that premise, which I feel like today isn't even really done that often, and it's like somehow she's still his reward, even though normally it would be the other way around, where the virginal person is the reward for the person with the troubled
Yeah.
past who's had many boyfriends, which is really just for a way of saying a lot of sex.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I was like, gosh, that could be interesting.
You want to see the 70s version of it, right?
I
You
do
want
want
to
to see
see,
the 70s version
like, it
of
makes
it.
you think of Clute. It makes me think of Clute. Clute is almost, I
Clute
mean, it's a
is,
completely different plot, but it's
yeah, but it's, no,
Donald
that's, you're
Sutherland's
right. That's one of the
character
ones
is
where,
a little more naive and innocent. He has a strength to him though. And, the Jane Fonda character is, a little worldlier and jaded and cynical and so on.
Yeah.
But that's absolutely not what you get in Bus Stop. And with our modern understanding of toxic masculinity, I mean, Bo is just like, he doesn't understand that other people have feelings. But
Gosh,
there's
it's
still some
so
humor to it. Like, I love when he drags her sleeping. Like, they could do it as a comedy still, even, and I could enjoy it. I loved it when he dragged her sleeping out to the rodeo and she's up on his shoulders talking to her friend about, like, I literally have no idea what's going on here. Like,
yeah.
I'm half asleep and so on. Like, that was funny to me. But you can't do it with Bo's character. The total
No, you can't.
his
There's
character has to be less horrible.
like
For it to
you
work.
might have been able to get away with like a comedy version of this, more or less adapted, like maybe in the 90s
I
or early
think I think he's
2000s, but not in the 2010s. Like
well, I
you'd
think
have to
his
change it.
the way he is cute and harmless.
Yeah.
The 50s think. The way
Yeah.
we think, we're like, oh no, this guy,
No,
murders
this is
people and gets
everything
away
that's
with
wrong with the world.
it. Yeah. But I still think you could do something, but there would have to be like a core of sweetness or kindness. He'd have to be more genuine. Bo's just
Something.
a, a, a too much, too much.
He's like he's literally he's abducts her. Like
Yeah,
he's I know, is he an egomaniac? Like I don't
yeah.
know. Like he's just
Yeah, her character would have to have more agency. So before we talk about Marilyn, I do want to slightly defend not Bo, because Bo is indefensible, but the movie. So did you notice, Theo, that this is also has one of your least favorite qualities to it, in that it was based on a play,
I saw that afterwards,
and
and
the
it
play
makes
takes
sense.
entirely at the bus stop, which is why it's called Bus Stop, because
Right.
someone wanted to get into a fight with me about why a movie had such a weird name like Bus Stop. And it's like, well, it's based on a play that takes place entirely at a bus stop. I suspect that last 20 minutes is kind of the bulk of the play. So all of his character development is in those last 20 minutes, because a lot of the other stuff, the whole him going to Phoenix, the rodeo, there is no character development. He is one note throughout that entire thing until the fight. So I can almost see the play in my mind where you just have these people arriving at the bus stop. He goes through this character growth, which in this play happens way earlier because it starts way later in the story. And then, I think
I
I think if, again, Bo is indefensible, but I think if he'd had character growth way earlier in the movie, that would have made but I mean, it's still
I
fundamental.
think I think
That's not happening in this universe. So
what you're saying makes complete sense, and I could totally believe it was that way. You know, we haven't seen the play or read it or anything, so who knows? But like
yeah,
that makes sense.
but it's still, no, his character is still from the beginning. You want him to get out and get hit by the bus and
Yeah,
repeatedly
like
run over by it.
I sent you a text, I think, that specifically said I want him to get hit by a truck, and then maybe they'll be like he'll get dented by it or
Yeah,
something.
he's
But
just so annoying.
whoa, like intensely.
But okay, so are you ready to talk about Marilyn specifically?
I do. I have a thought, but you can go first.
I just want to mention that it's her production company that made this. So this was really, she wanted this role.
Yeah.
And this role is not a gold digging blonde. It's a blonde who wants to go to Los Angeles and have a career, and gives it up to go be with this blowhard 21-year-old cowboy. But imagining that she doesn't see this movie the way we do.
Yeah.
It's about this woman who's been through a lot, who has these dreams, but then she meets a man who loves her just for who she is.
Yeah.
And if we ignore the fact that that man is possibly the worst person on the planet, like, I don't know, there's something kind of like, I'm probably, I could read too much into it, because she could easily just have wanted a role where she was a little bit dirtier, a little bit grittier, a little bit more going back to like the Niagara Don't Bother to Knock kind of roles.
Yeah.
But even, yeah, just something different, but in the same world is what she tends to do. But at the same time, I want to read something into her playing a woman who gets loved, who, because the one thing about Beau is he never wants her to change except to agree to marry. Like, the thing he wants to change is her mind about him. But
Yes.
he doesn't push her to dress differently, or, like the one semi-redeeming thing he does early on is that he makes the other men respect her and pay attention to her.
Yeah.
And so I'm reading way too much into it.
You are,
But
because also you could easily flip it and say like, well, he doesn't want her to have a career. He wants her to come live on the farm and raise his children and work on the
right,
farm.
for sure. But it's an interesting role choice. I think there's something interesting about her.
I don't disagree. I actually was thinking the same thing when you told me, while I was watching it, that she essentially chose this. I had two thoughts. The first one was like, God, if this is what she thought was interesting and wanted to choose, there must not have been a lot out there for her, which
Yeah.
is probably true. But on top of that, I think you're right that there is something to like, having listened to You Must Remember This, the first two episodes. I need to watch the third one before we record next weekend.
I listened to it, but I fell asleep. So I fell asleep for I fell asleep while she was, I forget what part she was. Oh, I fell asleep while she was working on the Misfits and woke up when she was dead. I was like, oh, gotta go
Excellent.
back. I
Gotta
missed,
go back.
I missed her singing drunkenly to John F. Kennedy. Anyway.
Excellent. But no, like, and like, I get from that, I kind of know that, like anything, her persona took over and she kind of wasn't really into that. And she didn't really know. It seems like, from what I remember, it's mostly the third episode, not the first two, but like where it's like she wasn't really sure how to get out of it. Like,
Right.
Maybe eventually the way she
The
gets out of
persona
it.
of the dumb blonde.
Yeah, the persona of the dumb blonde, and even just the movie star thing, and people thinking she's so beautiful. Like, she her way of getting out of it may have been to kill herself, which is really dark. But that is sometimes how people, they find a permanent solution for something when it really doesn't need that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's more nuanced than that, but we'll deal with that.
It's more nuanced than that, but like that may be a part of it.
We'll talk about her death with the Misfits, probably.
But like this, as a lead up to that, thought that I have, like, this might be like, well, she is kind of trying to break out of the dumb blonde role. She's dirty. She's has sex with a lot of men. She's there for the pleasure of men, like she is kind of in her other movies, but like it's dirty and it's not really glamorous like it is in Gentleman Prefer Blonde or How to Marry a Millionaire. And that, I think, gives, like, her performance in this is enjoyable and she's good in it. It's not necessarily any better than Gentleman Prefer Blondes or How to Marry a Millionaire or The 7-Year Itch. It's kind of in the same vein as those, where there isn't quite enough nuance to the character for
comic actress. I think her timing, again, her being on his shoulders, like dealing with this crazy person who's abducting her, I think is pretty good, but it's not a role that really demands a lot.
No, it's her comic. She's a good comedic actress, but there just isn't nuance necessarily.
But there's also that tonal disparity, because it seems that the whole bit where it's like she feels unworthy to him, it feels really like tacked on at the end.
Yeah,
you don't feel any of that towards the beginning. You're just like, who feels unworthy towards this guy? I mean, like,
yeah, completely. No, and so like she gets to do something more here than the other, I would call them her mid-tier movies, where she, in terms of, not in terms of quality, but in terms of like how much depth there might be to her character, at least as far as I can tell. So like, I appreciate that, like, this was what she wanted to do in trying to break out of that role. And a part of it may be that she still wanted to be sexy and, whether as a person or as a persona, she wanted to be sexy and appealing to people, but get to do other things than just try to marry a millionaire in one of 3 or 4 different movies.
I fantasize about the 70s version of this. He takes that money he won from the rodeo and uses it to go with her to Los Angeles and bankroll her career. Like, that's how I want it. Like, he finances her career or something. Like, that would have been like a fun subversive ending, but that was never going to happen.
It's so rare. I mean, even today, it's pretty rare to see that kind of stuff. In fact, so I'm about to talk about Friday Night Lights, and there's a spoiler with this. It's a TV show, but the season, I think there's like 4 seasons, and at the end of that 4th season, like, he's a football coach and she's been working in academia and she gets a really good job at a college, and he moves for her to a different place. And it's like, oh, that was mildly subversive, you know, as
Yeah.
far as things go. And it was, I mean, like that, I'm
Yeah.
trying to think of another time, and it's like, I'm sure it's happened, but it's just not that, like, I guess, that rom-com we didn't like very much with Charlize Theron and Seth Rogen, where she plays
Yeah.
the president.
First, yeah, I forget what the.
Yeah, I don't remember
I'll
what
look it up.
yeah, like I forget the name of it, but like that's technically the same thing. But like at that point, there's too many other problems with the movie. So yeah, I
Long
like
shot.
the long shot. Yeah, so like I appreciate that. Like even now, that doesn't happen very much. But you're right. I would like to see the '70s version of that because like this isn't
I'm not
like
sure
as
that would have even happened in the 70s version, to be honest. But I'm just, the alternate reality version.
this makes me think of CoverGirl, where like CoverGirl just makes me sad and depressed. Like
Yes.
this is a little bit later, I think, than CoverGirl. It's not too different in
Well,
terms
in
of
CoverGirl, she's already with Rita Hayworth's character is already with Gene
Gene
Kelly's
Kelly.
character. And yeah,
Yeah.
the fact that she's getting opportunities is just a massive threat to him. And
Yeah. Whereas like here, there isn't as much an idea of like
yeah.
she didn't necessarily. I mean, she wanted to go to Los Angeles, but she seems more willing and happy. Whereas, I mean, it's because of how like
Yeah.
colorful. I don't know. It's the same
And
thing,
that's
but it
where I
doesn't
wonder if
come off.
mixing a movie with a play didn't create some
Yeah.
weird, you know, I've seen a lot of, I think we talked about it in something recently where you adapt a book to a movie, and because you need to change a few things, but you don't change other things, some of the internal logic gets a little bit
Lost.
screwed
Yeah.
up. So yeah, it
Well,
definitely feels like
oh, that reminds me. We didn't talk about it when we were talking about Niagara, but like I don't understand how we knew to play that song from the bell tower at a certain time for Marilyn's character, unless he
I know.
somehow know. Anyways, that logic didn't make sense. Also, that makes me think about in this movie, there's a couple of really humorous continuity errors. Like somebody puts a sweat jacket on, like our bus driver in that end scene, like the great Grace designer puts
Mhm.
the jacket on for him or the shirt, and like it's very obvious it's center frame, and in the very next shot he's putting it on again, like
Yeah,
completely like no
yeah.
continuity.
I
Like it was
probably wasn't paying
hilarious.
that care. I had a hilarious thought because he was like laying. They have a whole. Well, Bo comes in to apologize, and
Yeah.
the bus driver is asleep, and he's supposed to apologize to him. But Virgil's like, "No, wait, you can apologize later." But I was like, "He's dead. The bus driver's dead. He died from his injuries in the night." And he just like, "Of course he wasn't." I mean, oh my god, this movie. I'm not now. I'm suddenly remembering the part where Virgil is like, "I don't need to go with you anymore. You found someone else." And
Yeah, like this was his duty to find this man a wife. Like what
like,
is the
you do all the ranch work completely on your own now. Like it just it's so silly. Anyway,
just spur
sorry.
of the
I'm so
moment
glad
decisions?
that you have discovered the wonder that is the happy story of just
Stockholm
life.
syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've discovered it. I can't recommend, like, again, like sometimes we talk about if we would recommend this to people, and it's like I'm even just thinking like who would I tell to watch this? Like this is such
I
a
tell people who like Gigi or Lily or West Side Story or Gypsy or any of the things from that era where it's like
West Side Story I
someone
could.
showing you lights and colors and being like, look, it's happy, and you're like, but it's like a dying puppy, like no, and
Yeah.
they're like, no, it's singing.
A West Side Story like transcends this a little bit because like too many people like that movie and it doesn't fully make sense to me, but it is kind of in that same
But a
genre.
lot of
Like,
these movies made money. These are not unsuccessful
but
movies.
West
Like
Side Story is still famous and popular, whereas like Bus Stop is not a movie that I think anyone will know necessarly. Like,
I think people know a bus stop. It's not to the level of West Side Story, I agree,
yeah,
but it's
it's
not like I was looking up how was I looking up Don Murray? I was looking up someone, and I just couldn't, like, they'd been in a ton of films and none of the names were that familiar to me. I
right.
think Bus Stop people know about somewhat.
Maybe so.
I
I mean,
mean,
it's a
Marilyn
Maryland
Monroe,
movie.
yeah, she's been in more movies than we're covering, and I think this is one of her more famous ones, but
Yeah, I
not as
mean,
famous as Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and so on.
yeah, no, I get it. This was we I mean we finally, you found ground on the noirs, I found ground in weirdo 50s stuff. I think we're coming to, you
We're
know,
forgetting, we're evolving as
we're
people.
evolving is, yeah, somehow.